Transportation Builders Association, Mr. Steve Voss, Mr. Rick Sense, Vice President of Development and Government Affairs for the Green Bay Area Chamber of Commerce, Debbie Jackson, Executive Director of the Transportation Development Association, and Rob Call, Executive Director of the Construction Business Group. Lady and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this program. So, ARPA and infrastructure investment, and this will be a kind of wide-ranging conversation. Much of it we probably touched upon earlier in the day today. But when we come to think about ARPA, our municipalities in Wisconsin received roughly $1.1 billion. Counties received roughly $1 billion, not just for infrastructure and transportation, but as a result of the pandemic for almost anything under the sun. Where do you believe, and we won't go in line, was to just pipe in with your thoughts, where do you think the greatest needs are in our state if we were going to spend some of those dollars, $1.1 billion from municipalities and $1 billion from counties, on infrastructure? Is it soft infrastructure, broadband? Is it hard infrastructure, surface transportation? Is it other areas?
You know, if you look at, and Mark, you should probably be actually sitting at this part because the local governments are the ones that are going to be spending this. You may want to weigh in yourself, but for example, in a township that gets significant ARPA dollars, the two main services that they're looking at really are EMS and their town roads. So for them, I'm not joking all that much when I say I think the vast majority where they would view their priority would be on their roads, what they have. If you get to a larger city or a lot of your counties where you've got a lot of social services issues, a lot of public health issues, a lot of police, fire, all those things, a lot of those issues, it becomes more complicated. But I do think for one-time dollars that come in, when you putting it in hard infrastructure, in transportation or in broadband, I think is a responsible investment of those dollars.
I'd echo the Secretary. I think the danger, particularly with the ARPA dollars, is that if it can't be a sugar high for you. These are one-time dollars. You need to invest them appropriately, and so a lot of those hard infrastructure things make sense with it. Now, there are soft infrastructure things that are going to be very compelling. But the challenge is going to be how do you use those one-time dollars in a way that doesn't create a longer-term fiscal problem for you. And so things like Craig talked about, broadband, transportation, water and sewer infrastructure. In some of these communities, the laterals. I mean, that's really the sort of I think big one-time investment that has a lot of opportunity to give benefit with these dollars without creating longer-term issues because you've built new cost into the system.
Broadband expansion and improvement is a huge need, especially in the rural parts of our state, and there's some opportunities with ARPA and other funding coming in. I think we've talked throughout these panels on the challenge of attraction and retention of talent and people. Without the ability to access high-speed internet, we will continue to see dwindling population in our rural communities. I think COVID has taught us that there are people interested in living in places maybe they wouldn't have thought of before if they can work from home, if they can start up a business and be successful in that community that's maybe more rural. So I think local government gets that. I think they've been the reason there was money in ARPA and some of the other infrastructure bills recently for broadband is because they've been screaming about it for so long, and that with some of your rural counties. So I think that transportation is hugely important. It's how we move things and people, obviously, and you ask anybody when they're locating a business, it's what's the transportation infrastructure like and what's the talent pipeline like. We need to realize that broadband is an essential part of that talent pipeline for attracting and retaining people, especially in parts of our state where they just wouldn't before consider moving to, and that creates a lot of opportunities for us. So I think local government gets that and have been very active in applying for these funds in parts of the state that need it. And I think that's only going to help expand and grow our transportation infrastructure. The more people you have that are willing to move to a part of the state that they wouldn't have thought of before, increases the need for other infrastructure, increases the opportunities for businesses, increases the opportunity for economic growth, and again, attracting and retaining talent, people, which is our main problem.
I certainly think the good news is that these ARPA funds will allow some communities to move forward with transportation projects and others that will be beneficial to Wisconsin's economy. I don't know that it's completely clear how many dollars are still available and where they are. And I think that leads to the question whether maybe some of these dollars have already been used to offset ongoing issues caused either by COVID or by the way in which we fund local governments. And so I think that's kind of a nebulous area when we're talking about the ARPA funding.
The bigger question needs to be what kind of coordination is going to be happening between those counties and between those municipalities and governmental entities. I would just throw that out there as part of the mix as well.
We've been talking all day about a reliable, sustainable, ongoing revenue stream for transportation. And much of transportation is maintenance. There is, of course, some creation, but a lot of it is maintenance. So the moment we create, now we're in maintenance. The ARPA dollars are one-time dollars, and as Steve kind of alluded to, something that has a beginning and an end is a more appropriate use of those dollars than ongoing. Yet much of our transportation infrastructure requires ongoing activity in dollars. So to spend dollars on ongoing activities, it becomes a difficult challenge for local government. So we'll go down the line. Rob, what are your thoughts on this challenge that local governments are facing, ongoing versus one-time needs?
Yeah, it's a great point, Mark. I mean, as a former mayor myself, people oftentimes don't think about the cost of infrastructure. They think of the initial construction cost, but they don't think the long-term costs. But you also have to think of the long-term benefits. When you do an infrastructure project that improves your main street or provides you better access to your community off the interstate, for something along those lines, the economic benefit from doing something like that will generate the revenue. I'm convinced, because I've seen it as a former mayor, and I saw it when I was as an elected official in the state legislature, but also just as a business person and in my current capacity at CBG. If you build it, they will come. So I get what you're saying, that yes, it's one-time money, et cetera, but it's one-time money that we need to make these investments, and it's not just the roads, it's the sewer and water underneath those roads. You can't see it, so it must not be a problem. Believe me, we all know in our communities, once we start ripping up those roads, we have a huge problem underground with our sewer and water infrastructure, which is well past its useful life in most circumstances. It's one-time money to make that infrastructure investment, but the ongoing benefits from that investment that these communities are going to reap will help fund the ongoing maintenance costs, which falls upon local government, the counties, cities, villages, and towns. They will see, I'm convinced, a return on their investment, because businesses want to be in a community that is investing in itself. People want to live in a community that is investing in itself. It's kind of like, you walk by a house and that's for sale, and if they haven't taken care of that house, that is something that you notice right away. And it's, you walk on by that house, you're not even going to look inside. It could be great inside, but if it doesn't look great on the outside. Communities are competing against other communities for people and businesses all the time. This is an opportunity to make that investment, and that investment will generate revenue in the form of taxes and other fees that will help pay for those ongoing costs.
I think it comes back to the first panel's discussion of the idea of getting past expenditure versus investment, and Rob, I think, hit it out of the park just now. It really is about an investment, and if it's a really good investment, it's going to be something that you're going to want to do and need to do, and then you're going to take care of that investment. So I think the mindset has to just move off of it's only one-time money, therefore we have to spend it this way so that it doesn't ever impact us again. And I think the idea too, I mentioned it earlier too, the idea of coordinating, if there's ways to coordinate that to kind of extend out how that money is being utilized. I know Green Bay area is a great example of that, where we have multiple municipalities all working together to achieve a lot of positive things. And there's where coordination has happened, there's been some very good opportunities that have taken place with funding. So I think that that is something that needs to continue and only grow as well.
Mark, I think your question really highlights an important fact. So when we're looking at transportation funding across the nation and in total, when you look at capital and maintenance, the vast majority of the dollars expended on transportation are actually at the state and the local level. So when we have this one-time money and we make the investment, we have to understand that that doesn't necessarily decrease the needs that we need to step forward with as a state or as local governments to maintain the investment and to really make progress going forward.
I kind of spoke about it before. I think one thing we do have to remember, and everybody's exactly right here on looking for, making investments that make sense, and we have to remember that, are we investing in Apple or are we investing in WeWork? There's investments and then there's investments, and so there are a lot of things that can be done with this money locally in the name of investing in our future. That doesn't mean all of them are sound investments. And again, I think I naturally have a bias here, but some of those hard infrastructure costs and large capital costs and things like that are, I think, proven over time to be sound investments in the strength and competitiveness of our communities.
So I think, in the question itself, Mark, you said, things that have a beginning and the end, and I think that's what it is. And I don't mean to put words in Steve's mouth, but he already spoke, so he can't do anything about it now. So, but I think it's referring to is it probably wouldn't be a good idea to take one-time money and increase the service level. That there's an expectation that you then have a cliff and you fall off on, and now you've created a higher service level. But if you take that money and you replace lead pipes under the road, or you repave 3 miles of that road, I don't know how you could go wrong doing that. You haven't set yourself up for a higher level of anything. You've just taken care of something that needed to be taken care of with that one-time money.
So, Rob, let me see if I can inappropriately interpret what you said. So if we invest ARPA dollars in a one-time project, there will be a return on that investment with business activity, more people, to use my words, more people making more money, engaged in more commerce, paying more in taxes. But those taxes would generally, as you well know, would go to the general fund. So here's the unfair part. Are you implying that perhaps we take some of those dollars that are a result of a transportation investment that find their way to the general fund and take those general fund dollars and put them into the transportation fund?
Well, it's not directly what I was suggesting, but it certainly has to be part of the discussion. People need to stop thinking of transportation in the silo method that we've historically thought of it. It impacts so many aspects of our life and our economy that we need to, and this has been covered by the other panels. We have an issue long-term in our funding of the transportation system. We need to transition over to gas tax will still be very relevant for the foreseeable future, more of a user fee, et cetera. But, yeah, if you've got transportation infrastructure projects that help drive our economy, and be it local government or our state, then I think that has to be part of the discussion. That is, I think, a reasonable concept to talk about the ability to recognize our investment is benefiting way beyond the system itself. It's benefiting communities, it's benefiting the state. And to just rely on the money generated by users to fund that investment probably isn't fair, because everybody's benefiting from that investment, not just the users.
It seems like we're putting together a gubernatorial budget proposal right now. Mr. Secretary, what are your thoughts on taking general fund dollars and putting them into the transportation fund, because it really is an investment with a return that benefits all of us.
Well, as I was talking about before, I think there's direct use charges. The most direct would be a vehicle miles traveled. That's about the most pristine direct user fee that you can talk about. Gas tax has been a good proxy for usage, but there's states that have looked at our neighbors in Minnesota, have looked at where you use general fund dollars, but there is a nexus, right? So whether you're talking about sales tax and automobile-related parts, there is that nexus to transportation. So I think things like that, we may need to be looked at as we talk about how to diversify the revenue stream.
Steve, do you have any thoughts on general fund dollars going into the transportation fund?
I'll take dollars wherever they come from. They all spend the same. And so I have no bias for or against general purpose revenue. I think the Secretary has mentioned it well, that you want some logical nexus there. I think another thing that we need to acknowledge is this maybe isn't as radical as we think it is, because there's already commingling. There's already general purpose revenue supporting the transportation fund. It's been more via one-offs than something systematic, and maybe that's the discussion we need to be having more than is it right to cross the streams? The streams are already crossed. So the question is, we're already putting general purpose revenue funds into transportation. Should we create a system that formalizes it and creates that nexus that the Secretary talked to? Because Rob's exactly right. There's any successful economy is built on two basic things: all right, physical infrastructure and human infrastructure. And if we're going to be successful in this state, we need to have both. And you look at the investments that the state has made in education. We need to have the same sort of urgency and long-term commitment to our investments in our physical infrastructure if we want our economy to grow. It is a shape about it is a discussion about what you want your economy to be. There is an economy that we could sustain quite comfortably at current levels, but that's making a decision about what you want that economy to do. Do you want it to grow? You're going to have to do some additional things. Do you want it to grow a lot? You're going to have to do some other additional things. It's a discussion about not just the future of transportation and transportation funding, but it's a broader discussion about what's your vision for the state? What's your vision for our state's economy?
The Transportation Development Association years ago was the major driving force in a constitutional amendment to ensure that transportation dollars stay in the transportation fund. So what are your thoughts on taking general fund dollars and putting them into the transportation fund as an investment in our infrastructure, which, as Rob Call pointed out, has a return on investment for all of us?
I think it's not necessarily a question of whether we should do it. I think it's a matter of balancing the portfolio. There is a benefit to the constitutionally protected funds. We know where they are. We know where they're coming from. The department can plan a 10-year project, understanding that those revenues will be there. General fund revenues are a little maybe riskier. Let's equate them maybe to stocks. And therefore, they can be reversed with a subsequent act of the legislature. And so I don't think it's a yes or no question. I think it's about building a portfolio with a diverse set of revenue streams, some of them constitutionally protected transportation user fees, and then absolutely some money from the general fund.
From a business side, what about the flow of dollars that are generated from a transportation investment and then dedicating them to transportation?
Well, I think you can look at it multiple ways. I guess I'd draw back to the Federal Interstate Highway Program when it was first established as a great example of an effort that was needed, that took place, and I don't even think people at the time could even wildly conceive the generation of wealth that was conceived from that project in and of itself. So I think one of the things business tends to do is tends to look more at potential goal and dreaming a little bit more when it comes to achieving things, and I think that might be an approach here that instead of having concern about which arbitrary fund or level of funding is where, maybe the approach should be more of, let's develop a ironclad plan that is agreed to by, people from both sides of the political aisle, and then worry about, okay, if we're in agreement on this moving forward, and then not only using transportation funding, but doing one-offs or granting or other opportunities to fund as we go forward. I think from that standpoint, if you're looking at it from a business perspective, I think that's, get yourself out of the box that you're already in as far as the rules you have to play by that are, again, arbitrary. No, they're not arbitrary because they're constitutional. I get that. But, I mean, the idea of, okay, if we're going to have money in one bucket, we have to worry about not using it from this bucket but that bucket. I would be more worried about the outcome of what we're trying to achieve.
We're going to go with one final multi-part question, and we'll just go down the line. Rob, we'll start with you. So talk to us about what you believe the greatest hard infrastructure need is in our state. For example, is it our local bridges? Is it our major highways? Is it expansion of the interstate? Is it, what is it? And then two, if you held the magic wand, what is it you would do? Not specifically to that greatest need, but just generally.
Great question, because it's a tough question. If you ask somebody in Rhinelander what the greatest need is for hard infrastructure in our state, you're going to get a very different answer than if you ask somebody in Milwaukee. I think the secretary before referenced the east-west, and or somebody did, and how we have some work left to do there. And if you ask anybody that travels that route, that would be the greatest need. You ask anybody coming up from Illinois to spend their money here, they would say the greatest need might be from Madison to Wisconsin Dells. Mm-hmm. But we have a lot of needs in our rural roads, and again, if you want to grow all of Wisconsin, I mentioned before broadband, but we have some really crappy roads in the outstate areas that need to be addressed, and that's no one's fault. It's just that everybody has priorities, and they just didn't have the money to deal with some of those roads. And I get it. They had to look at what had more user needs. But I think it's an all-of-the-above approach because everybody's got different interests given where they live and where they work. If you had to pick one, we need the east-west, we need the Madison to Dells projects to move forward, tourism, economy, those drivers. But I really think we need to start looking at some of the other more neglected parts of our state when it comes to infrastructure and see what we can do. You're not going to build an 8-lane highway in some parts of northern Wisconsin. It's not what they want, it's not what they need. But they do need roads that can get the school bus to school on time safely, that people can move, the semis can move commerce, move products. So we do have to make an investment out there. And as the Secretary said before, if people really realize that it's just $160 a year on average that they're paying, what do you pay for your cell phone bill every month? Now, most people are starting to cut the cable, but you still got to, if you want something, you're going to still have to pay for Netflix or HBO, et cetera. Add that up every month. It's ridiculously inexpensive for us, the amount of money we're using to fund our system right now. And I think if the magic wand I would wave is to try to figure out how to better educate the general public, not the people at this table, but the general public, on what the investment in their infrastructure would mean in a return to their communities. I can't stress it enough. When I was mayor of Monona, our main street, Monona Drive, was an embarrassment. It was just an embarrassment. And half the storefronts were vacant. And we made a concerted effort to make that investment. And now, even through COVID, you're not going to find many vacant storefronts. People started making investments in their properties then, either tearing them down or rebuilding or just refurbishing, rehabbing. It's been transformational. Infrastructure has that ability. It has that ability to encourage corollary, ancillary development. Without it, you get what you've paid for, and we had that in my community. And you see it across the state, and you hear economic development folks, and you've heard from some of them today, where if you can make that investment, you are going to get a return. So my magic wand would be making it more palatable, more understandable for the general public that we're not really asking you for money, we're asking you for an investment.
Well, I'm going to go local and parochial on everybody. Greatest need from our part of the state would be the completion of the Southern Bridge project in Brown County. Just a dramatic need there for traffic flow. The improvement that's necessary would really unleash a corridor of growth. It would really improve travel times. It's a long overdue priority, and I appreciate the support that we've received from the current administration on that as we're moving forward. The other one there locally would have to be the expansion of Highway Interstate 41. There's 2 lanes or 4 lanes, I should say, of traffic for quite a stretch from just outside of De Pere all the way down to Appleton. For those of us that drive the International Speedway every day, it can be challenging. I've had everything from a cooler fly out of the back of a pick-em-up truck that nearly took up my windshield to cars merging in, and I'm running into the shoulder trying to avoid having a multiple car pileup. And it's at least once a week where there's some sort of major traffic accident that I'm driving by on that. So that's really just from a safety need, I think, is necessary. Taking off my parochial hat, but also putting it back on somewhat. Magic wand. Since there's so many magic wands up here that you've given us, I'm going to get a little selfish on that one a little bit and talk about rail, passenger rail. I think it's the importance there, and I'm not just going to talk about the importance of the corridor for extending, from Milwaukee up to Green Bay. I think that the state's rail plan is something that needs to be adopted, and we need to look at expansion of service to Madison to the Twin Cities as well, up through Eau Claire. There's just a lot of areas in the state that are not being served, and that could be and should be, and I think that would really unleash the opportunity for us to attract more talent, provide just a better quality of life for those that are living here, be great for tourism, great for economic development. I don't see a downside to it, other than the cost, obviously. But I think that my magic wand would wave on that. So,
Greatest need, magic wand.
Okay, so now you realize I represent a multimodal transportation network. That's what makes this question so interesting. So I'm going to tell you the greatest need we need to address is looking at major corridors of commerce, and then looking at them not by modal solutions, but by looking for the connections and making sure that we have multimodal solutions to address those needs. We've talked about I-94 East-West, a great example. But in conjunction with I-94 East-West, we're also, we have an investment in I-94 East-West BRT. So we're looking at not only moving goods, we're talking about moving people. There have been investments in the bike and ped infrastructure in that area, which are connecting neighborhoods and giving better access to employee pools. So if I thought we needed a magic wand, I'd say let's think outside our modal, silos. But I actually believe everybody's ideas are great, but I think we have the power to move these messages. I don't think we need magic. I just think it's going to take some hard work.
First of all, I somewhat disagree with the premise on greatest need, because a transportation system, as Debbie referenced, is an interconnected thing, and to identify a greatest need kind of flies in the face of what a system of transportation is. But you asked the question, and so I'll give my answer. I think our greatest need is bridges. We have enormous needs in terms of bridges in this state. They are very expensive. Most of them over the Wisconsin River will need to be replaced, probably within the next decade. We also have a problem in this state where you could argue that we underdefine bridges. The standard that we set for the size of something that qualifies, the size of a span that qualifies as a bridge, is smaller than other states, and that handicaps us in terms of access to money for repair and replacement of those bridges. So and those bridges, you know, catastrophic bridge failures are something, fortunately, we don't have or much of a history of here in this state. And our bridges in general have been rated pretty good, but some of that is because we don't define some things as bridges that other states do define as bridges. And some of those smaller and more rural bridges that we don't think about when we think about the urgent needs are things that are critical lifelines for those rural economies. When those bridges are waitlisted and you've got to go, 15, 20 miles out of the way on an alternate route to get your ag products or your logging products to where they need to go, it is a huge cost and huge economic problem. So my biggest need would be bridges. My magic wand, I will relate to my biggest need, and I think if I had a magic wand, we would create a $25 billion bonding program with the debt service backed by general purpose revenue to replace and repair the bridge infrastructure in the state of Wisconsin.
So I don't know that I can be as specific as Steve was in that final answer. You get an A+ on the specificity there. I'm going to start with the magic wand part. I'm going to use that prerogative and then work back to talk about, obviously we've talked about reliability of funding and folks understanding it, but I want to talk about two things I haven't talked about, which are, I don't know how I'd leave here today and not have talked about it. And the first is safety. We have, since the pandemic we're in about 3 years now, across this country and in Wisconsin, driving behavior has become atrocious. I mean, there's no other word for it. While traffic was down during the times of the pandemic, when there was less people out, fatalities went up. They had been coming down every year for years, and they actually went up with less cars on the road. And when we think about in Wisconsin, how dangerous it can be when there's ice on the road and snow on the road and all of those, that's actually some of our safest times. When it's really dangerous is when it's beautiful and nice out, and our state patrol has given out the amount of tickets for over 100 miles per hour has gone up almost threefold. So one of the things that I don't love about this job is every single day I look at the fatality count. As of today, it's 488. It's way too many. We are tracking now behind last year right now. I don't want to even say that out loud, but so hopefully we'll start coming down again this year, but it's way too many. And we talk about 3 E's: education, enforcement, engineering. Education, we've launched our Buckle Up, Phone Down campaign. We've signed Bobby Portis with our Control Your Drive campaign. We're trying to do all the things we can in there. Enforcement, our folks are out there. I think they're stepping up that enforcement again. And on the engineering side, we try to say that we want to have safe systems. So even when there's poor driver behavior, hopefully that doesn't result in death, and that we engineer that way. But the magic wand part, and I don't know if we need a magic wand for it, the part that I think can have the most dramatic impact on all of that is technology. And what Dr. Noyce and the TOPS Lab have done on some of this autonomous area, it's always interesting. It's like the other question, reporters will say, when do you think we're going to be there? And of course, what they mean is, when are we all going to be sitting in self-driving cars? And what that really misses is, a lot of us right now have dynamic cruise control in our car that keeps you from closer. There's so many things that the TOPS Lab and UW-Madison are testing out. Park Street, we've got vehicles talking to other vehicles, to the infrastructure, to everything. I think that technology has the chance to take that amount of deaths every year and move it down significantly. So my magic wand would be to reduce those deaths. And the second part of that magic wand of things we hadn't talked about is this whole thing, we've been talking about workforce and out there in the private sector and workforce. And I will tell you, when I talk to my colleagues across the state, all the DOTs, workforce internally, as the job market is tightened in the private sector, they have little. We tried to do that last session and it was denied. And we use the private sector consulting engineers for about 70% of what we do. But we've got to have the ability internal to have the engineers and have the professionals that we need. And they're amazing people that are there, but we don't have the ability to respond to the market like that. And if we don't have that ability, sooner or later, it's going to catch up with us. So the safety and us being able to have the workforce and be able to pay the workforce what we need would be my two magic wand areas. As far as which areas need it the most, it's ports and passenger rail and freight rail and airports and local roads and bridges and bus systems.
Ladies and gentlemen, Rob Call of Construction Business Group, Rick Sense of the Green Bay Area Chamber of Commerce, Debbie Jackson of the Transportation Development Association, Steve Voss of the Transportation Builders of Wisconsin, and Secretary of Transportation, Mr. Craig Thompson.